Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us today. You have an incredible wealth of experience spanning over 35 years in fraud prevention, and you've played a pivotal role in shaping the way we think about fraud and financial crime in general today. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Reem. I've been looking forward to it. We've got to talk some. Last time I was in the office, enjoyed it, but I think this will be fun because we get to share some additional information that I really haven't talked with a lot of people about. So,
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into your journey, your thoughts on where the industry is headed, and of course, your reasons for joining DataVisor. But first, let's get started by going back to where it all began. So let's begin at the start of your journey. With such a long and storied career, I'd love to hear what first drew you into the world of fraud prevention. How did it all begin for you?
well, Reem, thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I am. It's weird, right? I mean, life is kind of random, right? You just kind of fall into things, and I had a journalism degree, and in college, we kind of had this open opportunity to research and write a paper on anything you wanted to. And so for whatever reason, and this is way back when, right? Back when there was no internet and anything. And for whatever reason, I thought, hey, I really want to see how much I can learn about somebody's identity just by doing, certain things, right? How much can I learn about their life and things that I shouldn't know, right? And so I did this project in journalism in college, and it was fun. I basically did social engineering of government groups, and I looked at microfiche online to look at, and basically I took somebody's identity and found out everything I could about them. I got their social security, I got their birth certificate, I got all kinds of information about their family, I got information even from hospitals on some recent surgeries that they had done, and I got x-rays back on, I think it was a broken foot of some kind. But, for me, it was really exciting to see how much I could dig into somebody's life to learn about them. And so um, I wrote that paper, I got an A, and then very quickly I got in trouble and the paper got taken away from me because I decided to use as my subject the president of the university at the time, Dr. Hardesty at Southwest Texas. And I don't know if he ever knows that I did that, but it was a joy, and so I got to learn from that. And then, very quickly after that, one of my first jobs out of school was I was just a collector at Chrysler Credit. It's an auto finance company, and I was collecting on this account, and I found out I started sharing information with other branches that were other dealerships, right, that were making loans. And I found out this woman named Carolyn Jones, Carolyn A. Jones, Carol Jones, all these different names. She had actually financed 5 different automobiles at 5 different dealerships. And we all, for whatever reason, delivered the vehicles to her at the Astrodome. I was working in Houston at the time. And she never paid us at all. I oddly got in contact with her after the fact, and she was pretty brazen. She laughed at me and said, "You guys are idiots for making the loans, and even bigger idiots for delivering at the Astrodome." And she just talked about what she was doing. She was taking the cars down to Mexico, and they were going to do chop them up and basically make money off of them that way. And that really intrigued me because, number one, she was just a normal person, and she was interesting and funny. And
Yeah.
but I realized she was doing bad, and I thought, I just want to help stop that. And when I started heading down the path of identity and fraud, I got to a big credit bureau here in the U.S. and I worked for those guys in the late 1990s. And I really look at what they were doing from a fraud perspective, and it didn't seem like it was anything hard. And so I tried to get the company to change. Big, slow companies can't change. And so I went off on my own, started my own company to try and build new technologies to catch the bad guys. And that's really how I got my fraud start. It was just this weird thing in college that led to a first job where I had a weird conversation with somebody who, taken us for 5 cars, and then tried to take that to a big company where I recognized they didn't innovate, and just tried to start my own thing to stop fraud.
Wow, what an incredible story, especially that project in college and then and then the auto finance story. It sounds like from those experiences, you really had a very hands-on role from the start. You really dug into the trenches, um, which probably laid sort of the foundation for your later innovations. So, you've made some really impactful contributions to the industry. I understand you hold several patents and have developed unique technologies. What are some of your earliest fraud innovations, and how did those ideas come to life?
Sure, and thank you. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I did recognize like you got to dig deep um, to learn and to solve problems. And so the first thing that we really did was pretty interesting. And this is back, in the early 2000s. Started a company called ID Analytics with a couple other gentlemen. And at that time, right, you have to put yourself way back, right? At that time, the fraud solutions were, hey, have we seen this name and that date of birth together before? Does that person, we find public record that they live at the address, Is that landline, because back then there were no cells, is that landline theirs, is it attached to the address, right? And so that was really kind of the science around fraud, right? It was terrible. It was high false positive rates. Fraud was getting through. Fraud was getting more sophisticated at the time too. And so it just wasn't working. So I had left, tried to start a company, and it didn't work. And then about 2 years later, I got back involved with some guys and used the technology and learnings from that 2 year effort and started a company called ID Analytics, which I think a lot of people know. I think Lexus owns it now. It's gone through and changed a bunch of hands. But back then, the reason we started it was we wanted to use technology to identify fraud. And again, at the time, it was all just, does this data match and does it not? Basically kind of a CIP program, right? Back then, and that was sophistication fraud, right? And so we got a really smart group of people together. And we could not figure out how are we going to solve adding all these data together and trying to link it together. Nobody at the time had the technology to do it. And this guy named Shui Xiao, he came up with using graph theory to create linkages. And so we used graph theoretic to basically pull in all the information. A guy named Jim King built some cool technology to make us do it in real time. And so we would actually be able to do a lot of link analysis in real time to understand how are people using these addresses and all these other different parts of the identity together to try and see if we could see identity, right? And so we did that. Back in 2003, we were using gradient boosted trees, which is machine learning. And so it's interesting, right? Because we still talk about machine learning like it's new, but machine learning has been a part of identity since 2003. And so we built those scores. One thing that I think is kind of funny, when you look at a fraud score today, the higher the fraud score, the worse it is, the more suspicious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so because we were the first ones who developed that, I actually inverted the score and the requirements because I was like, hey, I don't want people confusing this. This is not a credit risk score, right? And you got to remember back then, there was no difference. People would say it's a credit risk score, no, it's a fraud risk score. And they didn't understand, right, that technology, could be built. And so we inverted the score. And so that's why today a high fraud score is bad, right? And a high credit risk score is good. And so very little known secret is the reason for that inverted score is because of the way I wrote the requirements to be a little bit different. It was funny at the time I did that, and people were like, that's nuts. We should make it look like a credit risk score. And I was like, no, it's different. So so that was fun. So I got to work on that. And then probably the more recent technology that I worked on is fraud, but it's more data sharing specific. So, I mean, Reem, we all want to share data. We talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
but, there's issues with data breach. The more data I share with outside parties, the more,
Yeah.
problems I can create for my own customer base. And so one of the things that I've always had in my mind is how do we create identity magic, right? And what I mean by that is how do we share data without sharing data, right? Think about that problem. How do you solve that, right?
Right.
And so I created a company called Expert Data Exchange where it was very different. We built it in a way that said, hey, Reem, you have 14 million accounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't send it to us, right? Let me put some software, behind your firewall, and basically share code instead of identities. Let me send something to you, match it inside your system, bring the data back, run the signals and things you need, and just bring the signals back, right? And so that was the whole premise of Expert Data Exchange, was building technology, fraud technology, where you get the value of sharing information but you don't actually have to share PII and create those security vulnerabilities. So that company I sold to somebody for a song, and basically it was just ahead of its time. And I think it's still a little bit ahead of its time. I'd love to see DataVisor do something like that. I don't think it'd be hard for the company. They're so technically like advanced. But so that was fun for me is getting close to magic, right? And I think, hopefully before I retire, we'll see some of that magic happening. And I think that's a good thing for business, good thing for vendors, right? Because we can share more data without sharing data. And of course, good thing for consumers. So those are some of the things I've been pretty excited about.
Yeah, wow. Very, very exciting and very revolutionary for the industry. It'll make huge strides to have data that sharing data without sharing PII or
It's magic. It's magic, right?
Yeah. And desperately needed. And I think it's something that everyone's talking about these days.
Yeah.
So I also understand that a lot of your ideas and contributions have been revolutionary, like flipping the concept of credit scoring for fraud risk. I heard you also coined the term synthetic fraud, which is now a widely recognized concept. Can you tell me how that came about?
Yeah, sure. And it's funny, I get credit for coining the phrase, which actually happened. I mean, if you look at some of the old Alien movies, there's a synthetic character in that, which is kind of where synthetic fraud came from. But for me, the more important thing is that I was the first people were seeing the behavior, but nobody had seen it and tried to say, hey, this is a new fraud behavior and we need to educate everybody about it. And so that's what I'm really more proud about is that. And the way it came about, it was interesting. We built this really cool technology at ID Analytics years and years ago where it was a lot like DataVisor's knowledge graph, but it was nowhere near as incredible as what DataVisor has. But we could basically look at different link analysis and we can see fraud behaviors and how people were reacting and how they were acting, right? So I loved that so much. I would come in at 3 in the morning every day, and I would work till 8. So I'd get 5 hours in of doing fraud investigation. So it didn't impact my day job, right? But that was some of the most enjoyable time that I've spent in fraud because I was looking at a tool that nobody else had. Nobody else had link analysis like that back then. And I could see patterns, behaviors for identity theft, for all kinds of things. And so it's like 3 in the morning. I'm digging into this data. I've been doing it for about a week, started recognizing patterns where, hey, these identities look the same. There's Michael Cook, Mike Cook, Mark Cook, right? All at the same address, using different phone numbers. And there was big rings of this activity, right, that I could see because of the link, right? And then I noticed back then they were using hard to verify employment. So we used to back a while ago validate, hey, Reem, you work at DataVisor, I'm going to call them, make sure you do, make it's real, right? But all that could be scammed and faked anyways. But they were all of these identities that I was seeing, they were using hard to validate places of work, right? So back then, sometimes it was easy to call somebody and get a hold of them. Mechanics, for some reason, were pretty easy because they could scream at them, they'd come back in and they would do the validation. But hospitals were difficult. And so these guys were using hospitals to verify employment where you call them and they wouldn't do it, right? So you'd have to go, okay, and you get frustrated and you validate it. So it was fun to learn about it. It was fun to coin the phrase, right? But what was most important for me was having the ability to go to the industry, right, and talk about it ad nauseum to as many groups as possible, including the government, to say, here's a new kind of fraud behavior that's happening. Everybody needs to listen up. What I learned from that is that educating people is what this industry needs.
Okay.
Today, with the internet and social networking and media and influencers, it's a little bit easier. But when you find something new in fraud, you have to educate people like as much as you can, because the first time they hear it, they don't pay attention. The second time they hear it, they might pay attention, but they'll forget, right? The third time they hear it, they'll remember, but they don't do anything. The fourth or fifth, they might do something. So as fraud industry practitioners, what we have to do is when we learn, educate as much as we can. And so, yeah, that's synthetic fraud. And, we're still learning about synthetic fraud today. I just 3 years ago learned, they're really attacking in the DDA space. So banks are, 3%, 3 to 4% of open active accounts in the US at banks are held by synthetic identities. And that was because they changed their behavior after COVID to
Mm.
start doing more fraudulent money movement. And so it's just interesting to see. Yes, we learned about it years ago. We educated about it, and wow, it changed their behavior like night and day back after COVID. So got to keep on learning.
That's fantastic. So a lot of things are changing in the world. Synthetic fraud has changed. Fraud is constantly changing. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges banks, credit unions, or fintechs are facing today?
So I'll answer that broadly, right? And then I'll give some detail to it. But and this is where people probably get mad at me for saying this, right? But we are losing uh, today, right? Fraudsters have gotten ahead of AI. Somebody asked me the other day about, who do you think's winning and with battle of AI and fraud, right? And, my response was, hey, look, it's a soccer game, right? Good guys, bad guys. We showed up at 7 because we were told that's when the game started, right? So we showed up at 7. Well, the game started at 6, and the bad guys have been out there scoring goals, right? Sharing information, talking to one another. Here's our new plays. Here's going to be these. So we showed up late, right? And so I think that's cool, right? We still have time to win the game. We'll win this game, right? But I think that's probably the most important thing that I think people need to learn to understand is that, hey, we might be behind. So we may need to change some things, right? So data sharing, number one, if you think about it, the fraudsters, right? Telegram, they got caught. They're kind of moving around to different places, right? But the bad actors are sharing information better than we do. They are sharing skills and tools and technologies, and people are buying those things. They're buying checks off on. They're doing all these things, right? They are sharing data better than us. And so we have got to get to where we share data much better. And that doesn't mean just, hey, bank credit card, let's share credit card fraud into a consortium and work on it, right? What it means is, as an industry, we need to share all kinds of fraud in a database, use that to build a consortium and learn. And then we need to get outside of where we're comfortable with. So fraud, we're comfortable doing fraud stuff. The marketing industry, they have a ton of information on consumers. We have never really taken advantage of that. Crypto, financial fraud, cyber intelligence, a lot of data, right? So we need to kind of break some silos.
Okay.
We need to get comfortable sharing data. Maybe we can do through magic, right? But I think that's probably one of the most important things we can do. Another thing is, the banks, credit unions that we work with, they have model governance, right? And there's good reasons for model governance, just impact and understanding how we may be hurting consumers and don't need to, especially with AI and that kind of moving in the frame. But we have got to get to where we're speeding up our models. At DataVisor, they use unsupervised machine learning models, which kind of helps because it captures those new patterns, those new peaks, that a supervised model won't work. So, what I've learned here is unsupervised plus supervised, build an ensemble model and a strategy. And that's going to be better at kind of like finding all that fraud that's hurting you all the time, and then all these peaks and these things that are changing. So speeding up technology and the enhancements of the models, using new behaviors, it's key, kind of in trying to get out ahead of the new behaviors with things like unsupervised machine learning, right? And for the bank, speeding up governance, right? So often, because I've worked in solution providers like a big chunk of my life, we may build a new model, right?
Okay.
But the customer may be on a model that's 2 versions back, right? Because the implementation is going to take some time, right? We have to go through model governance.
Mm.
I would suggest, right, banks especially, right, fintechs, find ways to speed up your model governance, right, so that you can stay ahead. Because having compliance and model governance get in the way of catching fraud is not good, right? We can speed past that. So,
Yeah.
a couple other things I can mention. I'll just mention one more. One of the things I've been thinking about lately is I'm a friction heretic. Uh, friction's bad. We've talked about friction being bad, right? And as we move to digital, we didn't want to impact consumers, especially in new accounts or transactions, right?
Yeah,
But again, uh, along the theme of we're a little behind, I think we're going to have to add more friction to the process,
yeah,
right? At least for the next couple of years, so that we can kind of slow up the advancements that our adversaries have made,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Do a better job and of identifying like what do we need to do some second work on, right? Some step up authentication. Look at a document, validate it's right. Look at a selfie, make sure it's the consumer, right? So I am going to become a friction heretic over the next couple of years and basically say I know that we've said friction's bad, but friction's good, and I think we need to spend better time focusing on those technologies because today with data breaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the identity they want to steal or login credentials. They want to get the identity and login credentials, and they want to steal a driver's license, right? Because they want to get out ahead of that step up authentication. So we need to get better, right? And I think the last thing really is, and I will mention it, we have time, is consumers. Uh, Today, if you look at what's happening in fraud,
Uh-huh.
they're not necessarily attacking banks and fintechs as much as they are attacking consumers, right? Because what I think fraudsters have figured out is the soft underbelly of the financial economic system here in the US and probably the world is the consumer. They're not as well educated. They don't have any fraud tools, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what I see is over the next several years, decade, could be generational, right? But at some point, today, DataVisor, we have our customer. We work with them. That customer works with us. Solution provider, customer. We're bringing in all kinds of data through the orchestration, right? So we have all of these people participating, but the consumer's not a part of it. So what I feel like is we will get to the point where the consumer plays a bigger role as your data provider, or the consumer plays a bigger role as your platform vendor, like DataVisor, or as, your model spend. So I think we need to start looking at bringing the consumer into the loop, which is going to take some time. I don't think I'll get around to see it, unfortunately, but once they're in the loop, that is going to be our biggest advantage against fighting against fraud.
Wow. All right. So you unpacked a lot of challenges. There's really multifaceted challenges and new solutions. I like your point about the need for faster tech adoption, data sharing, and bringing the consumers into the mix. So a lot of room for improvement, a lot of work to be done. So switching over to solutions, tell us a little bit, you recently joined DataVisor. Um, what's most exciting for you in this new chapter in your career? What drew you to the company? Yeah, what gets you excited about this new role?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Coming to DataVisor was one of the easiest decisions I've made in my career, right? And
Fantastic.
it's for a ton of different reasons, and I'll try and listen as quickly as I can. But number one, the people here are brilliant, right? It's nice to work at companies, sometimes people are smart, sometimes people are really, really smart, right? But it's that rare entity where people are brilliant. I mean, they come up with things that, you wouldn't have come up on your own. They think of the problem really deeply, right? There's a few companies like that in our space, but DataVisor is one of those guys. And so, I looked at their technology and beforehand, and it looked great. Now that I'm in DataVisor, it's better than I thought. Like even the knowledge graph, right? We have a knowledge graph that the company's built. It's proprietary, right? Because the graphing systems that were out there weren't real time. They couldn't do second hops. They couldn't do all of these things, right? And so the company went and built knowledge graph, and I actually was slacking back and forth with my boss Long over the weekend, and I learned all this stuff about it. I'm like, well, why don't we talk about that? It's crazy. So the one reason I wanted to join is because the technology is just fantastic and I love it. I think I'm probably DataVisor's biggest fanboy at this point. The the second reason is new account fraud. I've done a lot of time in new account fraud. New account fraud is mostly software, to be honest. There's great third-party fraud models. There's great data sharing. There's great synthetic fraud models that are out there. first party fraud needs some more work on it, right, to be better. But a lot of new account fraud has been solved. And so at DataVisor, while we are building new account solutions and partnering and orchestrating great solutions from vendors,
Mhm.
so new account fraud, it's kind of taken care of. Technology is going to have to continue and get better, right? Fraudsters continue to change their behaviors, right? But really, in the U.S., across the globe, fraud is really going to be more into the transaction space. It's going to be more in account takeover, and certainly in P2P, right? I was talking about consumers and how they've been scammed, right? So I wanted to be a data advisor so I could participate in that, right? I want to help stop that. And I think, especially in the banks, we could do better at learning how these fraud attacks are happening and how to stop them. We could do a better job of sharing information, right? Like I've mentioned earlier. So I want to be a part of stopping bad actors in the account hurting consumers, right? So that was the second reason that I wanted to join. And the third reason is there's a lot of stuff happening on the regulatory landscape right now, Reem, and it's interesting. I don't know if you've heard about authorized push payment fraud and
Mhm.
liability shifts that I've been tracking since October, maybe 2 years ago, coming up on 2 years. And that shift is going to happen. I know banks, fintechs, payment processors, they're pushing back, right? But it's going to happen. And it's either going to happen by regulation, or I hope, right,
Mhm.
the industry starts to self-regulate itself, right? Because regs are great. Once regs get put in place, there's strict enforcement, fines, costs, right? Compliance costs. So I'm hoping the banks, the payment processors figure it out and say, hey, time out, we'll solve this, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think the government probably would be happy with that too. So those changes in regulations where they shift the liability from the consumer to the bank, once you start losing money, you start trying to solve the problem faster, right? And so that's why I wanted to be here. DataVisor is brilliant people, great technologies, new space for me where a lot of fraud is going to be happening. And I do see regulatory changes creating more of a sense of urgency within the banks and fintechs, where I think we're going to learn more about fraudulent money movement than we've learned in the last 30 years. I think in the next 3 years, we're going to learn more than the last 30.
I hope so. I hope so.
Oh, we will. I guarantee it. Guarantee it.
Yeah. Yeah, everything is moving faster.
Yeah.
So we have time for one more question, Mike. So I'm thinking let's take a step back from fraud for a moment. I'm curious about what drives you personally. What are some of your passions or hobbies outside of work?
Um, so personally, there's probably a couple things there, right? One's my kids. I have 5 kids. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, I also have 5 kids.
Oh, do you really?
I
Oh my
do.
God, we should get together. Are yours younger? Yours are young.
The oldest is 25, the youngest is 14.
That's fantastic. I'm kind of close. I have 5, but I have 4-ish that are adulting pretty well, but 3-ish that are adulting, and two that are still like getting through college and high school.
There's a
Um,
little bit of a shift.
yeah. So I love them very dearly. One
Yeah.
of my daughters though, and this put a fire into my butt like 2 years ago. This is before she was going to Texas Tech University, and she got scammed. Um, it was a government impersonator scam, and they convoluted story. Somehow she was involved in selling drugs or something, and they were going to fine her. It was going to be very bad. She was going to go in jail, and she was like, "Oh my God, I didn't do any of this, but how can I get out of it?" So they talked her into paying her $900. So she took 900 out of her account, gave it to him. $900. I mean, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But my daughter, she knows what I do for a living. We've talked about it a lot. So she got scammed, right? And so I realized, wow, even somebody who is kind of in the periphery and should know, she got scammed. And the second thing that happened was she was emotionally impacted by it. Like
Of
she
course.
had to hide things from me. We were supposed to get a dinner, but she had to change some
Yeah.
things around because she had to accommodate this scammer that was, with the government that was going to put her in jail. So she went through such uh, uh, emotional like harm that that pissed me off, and it made me want to, beat our adversaries even more. And so that's one of the things probably is my kids the most, and then A second thing that's tied to my kids that is really important to me is trying to move towards sustainability.
Yeah.
So, very early on, you see kids, you get materialistic, right? And so I started making my own furniture out of scrap wood, right? So that they would
Fantastic.
realize, hey, it's not about being materialistic. And then I started this thing called Project Next. If you can see here, I have a massive map on my wall. I started this probably 6 years ago. And Project Next was, I wanted my kids to understand, hey, when y'all graduate from high school and you're completely out, I'm going to go live sustainably, right? Do I know anything about it? Absolutely not, right? I can build, I've been out in the woods, I've had cattle, right? But, living sustainably, fully off the grid and taking care of yourself, right? That's a passion of mine. So I ended up Project Next. It was all about, hey, where am I going to find, where do I want to live next? Where does the ground hold water? Where is the temperatures okay, that you could actually live in an environment. And so I bought 45 acres in East Texas. I'm building out a cabin by myself that I'll live in, and I'll fix it up with, solar, and I'll use gravity fed water.
Yeah.
And, hopefully in 4 years, I'll be spending a substantial amount of time out there living sustainably, living off the land, and teaching my kids, don't ever stop learning. Don't be afraid, right? And also, hey, man, you don't need that big house, and you don't need to spend all that money. You can
Yeah.
live sustainably and feel good about your life.
That is the most amazing retirement dream and goal. It's not even a dream. You're acting, you're doing it. It's gonna happen. That's really
Everybody's invited. You can come out. I got wood to burn, a lot of land to clear. Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's enjoyable. I love it, and it's very peaceful out there.
I'm sure it is, and hopefully fraud free and scam free too.
I think about it a lot out there. So
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic, Mike. I really enjoyed our conversation. Our time is nearing the end.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so
thank you. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed getting to know you and the other guys at DataVisor, and I look forward to working with the team. And I really hope, I can help. It is about that work for DataVisor. It's about building the brands, about making sure people understand educating them on what the products are that the
yeah.
company has. But for me, it's really about stopping fraud, right? And uh, helping people understand how they can stop fraud better, right? And applying the correct amount of friction, right? Which again, I think we need to increase the amount of friction we do in the next few years. And so I'm really excited about being here and hope
Yeah.
I can make an impact.
You already have. I think everyone's really happy to have you here. We are.
Nice to be here.